He stood frozen in the hospital corridor as the doctor's words echoed like thunder. "You can't marry her, she's dying." People walked past, machines beeped, but his world narrowed to the fragile girl behind the glass window. He had known about her illness, yes. He had watched the way she hid her pain behind smiles, how she joked so no one pitied her. From the first day he met her, he didn't fall in love with her lifespan, he fell in love with her soul. The doctor expected him to break, to run, to choose an easier life. Instead, he breathed slowly, gathering strength from every memory they shared, and whispered, "I know." Because love, to him, was not about how long, it was about how deeply one could live in whatever time remained. Their love story had not begun like fairy tales do. There was no dramatic music, no glittering backdrop, just a small library, dust floating in warm light, and her coughing quietly into a handkerchief while pretending she was fine. He noticed the trembling in her hands as she reached for a book and gently helped her. She laughed nervously, apologizing for being clumsy, and he found that laugh echoing in him for days afterwards. They talked about stories, life, and fears they didn't admit to anyone else. Even then, he sensed she carried a storm inside her body, but her courage made the storm look beautiful. He told himself then, it doesn't matter how long she will stay, what matters is that she came into his life at all. When he finally learned the truth from her lips, it was night. They were sitting on a rooftop wrapped in city lights, and she told him calmly, as if narrating someone else's fate, that she didn't have long. She expected him to pull away, everyone else did after knowing. But he held her hand tighter, feeling each trembling line of her palm, and said nothing at first. Tears gathered in her eyes, not because of the illness, but because she feared being a burden. Then he told her softly that time does not decide love, hearts do. The stars above seemed to listen as he promised without fanfare that he would stay, no matter where the road curved, no matter how short or painful it might become. The hospital visits became part of their days, but he turned them into memories instead of tragedies. He brought books to read aloud when her energy failed, brought silly stickers to decorate her IV pole, and played her favorite songs at low volume until nurses smiled. She would tease him, saying he looked ridiculous trying to dance in the tiny space, and he would joke that she was the queen of the ward. Sometimes pain bent her like a fragile branch, but she still asked him about his day, still thanked the nurses, still smiled at children passing by. Watching her, he learned that strength was not loud or dramatic, it lived in quiet endurance and gentle words spoken through suffering. 5. Her parents, however, were not smiling. They loved her fiercely and feared twice as much. When he asked for permission to marry her, they stared in disbelief. Why tie himself to grief? Why promise forever to someone who might leave soon? They were terrified of him suffering alongside her, terrified of their daughter feeling guilty. He listened respectfully, but his heart didn't change. He explained that love does not calculate distances or lifespans, it simply happens, and if it is real, it asks for devotion, not convenience. He told them he wanted to give her a bride's laughter, a ring on her finger, and memories instead of endless hospital walls. Slowly, through tears, they saw the sincerity in his eyes. The doctor thought he was being foolish. He confronted him in the hallway, voice raised with frustration, saying marriage wouldn't cure her, wouldn't stop what was coming. He described the pain, the complications, the inevitable goodbye. Many would have broken under such harsh truth, but the young man simply listened with respect. When the doctor finished, he replied steadily that he was not marrying her to escape grief, he was marrying her to honor joy. She had given him light during his darkest days, and now it was his turn to hold the lantern for her. The doctor went silent, realizing that this was not naive stubbornness, this was love transformed into courage. When he entered her room after that conversation, she already knew what had happened. She had heard the raised voices and tears trembled in her lashes as she begged him to reconsider. She didn't want him chained to sorrow, didn't want him to remember her bedbound and pale. But he took her face gently in his hands and told her he didn't see illness when he looked at her. He saw the girl who quoted poetry, who fed stray cats, who laughed at bad jokes, who changed him forever. He asked her to marry him right there, with no ring yet, no grand gestures, just truth. She cried, not from pain, but from the overwhelming realization of being loved without condition. Their wedding was simple but glowed brighter than any grand celebration. A small garden behind the hospital, white chairs, a few flowers that nurses helped arrange, and the sky stretching wide in blessing. She wore a light dress, fragile as morning mist, and he looked at her as if she were the only person in the world. Their friends gathered. Even the doctor stood at a distance, eyes softer than before. When she walked toward him, each step was slow but determined. They exchanged vows, promising not forever in years, but forever in hearts. Every tear shed that day held both joy and sorrow, woven together like threads of the same cloth. After the wedding, time became both enemy and gift. They counted days not by calendars but by moments, sunsets watched together, meals he cooked while she sat nearby, their shared jokes echoing down quiet halls. Sometimes she was strong enough to walk outside, feeling the wind play with her hair. Other days, she lay weak while he read to her for hours. He learned the rhythm of her breathing, the meaning behind her smallest frown, the silent cries she tried to hide. She, in turn, worried less and began to live more freely. Marriage had not cured her, but it cured the loneliness she feared most. There were dark nights when pain overwhelmed her. She would wake gasping, apologizing again and again for being heavy to carry. Each time, he silenced her apologies with gentle words and warm embraces. He reminded her that love is not a transaction measured by effort, it is a promise willingly made and joyfully kept. He kissed her forehead and whispered stories of their imaginary future, not to deny reality, but to give her sweet dreams to fall asleep with. Those nights taught him that love's truest form appears when everything else falls apart and only faith remains. As days passed, she began writing letters secretly, letters addressed to him for after she was gone. But one afternoon he discovered one by accident and tears filled his eyes. She confessed in the letter how grateful she was to be loved like this, how she never imagined being a bride, how he had turned her short life into a complete one. When he confronted her gently, she smiled and said she was simply preparing. He took the letters, kissed her hands, and told her they would open them together someday, not in grief but in gratitude for the path they had walked side by side. The doctor who once shouted found himself transformed by watching them. He saw in their quiet moments what textbooks never taught, how love could soothe where medicine could not reach. He treated her with renewed tenderness, not as a failing case, but as a brave soul finishing her journey with dignity. He apologized softly to the young man one day, admitting that he had underestimated the power of the human heart. The young man simply smiled and thanked him for fighting for her life every day, because they were, in truth, on the same side. The last days came like whispered footsteps, gentle yet unstoppable. She was weaker, her voice barely rising above a breath, but her eyes still shone whenever he entered. They spent hours holding hands, saying little, because silence between them had become full of meaning. She thanked him again and again, and he kept telling her there was nothing to thank him for, that loving her had been the greatest gift. The room was filled with photos of their short but beautiful marriage, evidence that a lifetime's worth of love had unfolded in a brief chapter. On a quiet evening, as twilight softened the world, she rested her head against his chest and listened to his heartbeat. She said it was her favorite sound, the rhythm that had promised to stay even when everything else faded. She told him not to live in sorrow, but to live boldly for both of them. He promised through tears that he would carry her in every step, every sunrise, every kindness he showed others. She smiled softly and closed her eyes, as if drifting into a peaceful sleep, surrounded by love instead of fear. After she was gone, he did not collapse into darkness as everyone feared. He grieved deeply, yes, but he also lived the way she had asked him to, fully, kindly, bravely. He visited the garden where they married, spoke to her in the wind, and helped other patients who felt alone. The doctor often remembered his words, "I know," and finally understood their meaning. He had not married a dying woman, he had married life itself in her, however brief. Their story became a gentle reminder to everyone who heard it. Love is not measured in years, but in the depth with which two hearts dare to meet.